Hello and welcome to another spooky edition of Saved by the 90s. My name's Adam Patterson. With me today is the guy who always gives out full-size candy bars, Mr. Ken Bakley. Hey, Ken.
Hello. Yeah, we'll just say that's non-falsifiable. I'll just be like, well, if it was a normal Halloween, of course I'd give out full-size candy bars. Say.
Man, there were very few houses that did the full-size, but those were the best. Those were the best houses.
Well, we'll just say, because no one can prove it isn't true, that if it was a normal Halloween in 2020, I'd be one of those houses.
There you go. In celebration of Halloween this month, we're going to be discussing two emerging trends in the 90s, meta horror and found footage. So steady those cameras and read over those slasher rules, because this is Saved by the 90s.
It's alive.
It's gentle. It's squishy. It's fruity. It wiggles as it slides down your throat. Eat it before it eats you. J-E-L-L-O. It's alive.
I hated everything about that.
Isn't that the, grossest? It's so gross, that commercial. Especially when you're just hearing it, when you're not seeing the actual commercial, and just hearing him describe it like sliming and slurping down your throat.
There was literally nothing good about that. Our first film this month was directed by a horror pioneer who helped popularize the slasher movie in the 80s and would later deconstruct it in the 90s. Released on October 14th, 1994, this is Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
How would you like to join us in the definitive nightmare?
I thought you killed Freddy off.
They told you he was dead.
And since you've been thinking of making it, has anything funny happened?
For 10 years, he's been held captive as Freddy in the Nightmare on Elm Street series.
And now he's got the last laugh.
What is he doing?
He's decided to cross over out of films into our reality.
Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Miss me?
In this meta horror film, a demonic entity uses the fictional character Freddy Krueger to enter the real world and torment Elm Street heroine Heather Langenkamp and her family. Ken, we'll start things off with you. What did you think of New Nightmare?
This is a movie I've seen a few times now, and I think every time I rewatch it, I come away with a greater appreciation for it. I actually think this is a really impressive movie. I think this is maybe one of the best like major texts of a horror movie serving as a commentary on horror movies, and even some ways I think it accomplishes things that even Scream doesn't, but I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here.
I agree. I'm a big fan of this movie as well. It's not my favorite in the Elm Street series. I think the first one is probably still my favorite, with part 3, the Dream Warriors, being a close second.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that I'm sure that there are other meta horror films that were released before this movie, but I remember when I first saw this, I felt like this was just something so fresh and so unique, and I loved how it did sort of deconstruct the horror genre and also deconstruct the Nightmare on Elm Street series. I mean, when you look at this movie, it's essentially a reimagining of the first one. Everything that happens, all the kills, there's so many little winks and nods to the original that it's something just really kind of fun and special.
Yeah, I think it's not only a very interesting and direct commentary on the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, on maybe just how society kind of reacts to the horror genre in general, but I think it's also a really interesting examination of just artists considering how they approach their own art after a certain point, after it's been accepted into the culture, it's kind of out of their hands, and how it's at once something that is still their own, still something they're so associated with, but just this idea of Freddy Krueger becoming a entity that exists in the world of the films, kind of, maybe it seems like a commentary on the idea that as much as you're associated with something as an artist, it after a point you no longer control it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just a solidly made movie. It accomplishes a lot, but just even as that way of maybe Craven looking at maybe it was Craven kind of having that experience with his own work, just because it gets to a point where it just gets accepted into the culture in like this omnipresent way, and perhaps the only way to really evaluate what it still meant and what that relationship was would be to make a movie like this, which so tries to externalize it in a way.
Yeah, and I think that is especially evident because you have Wes Craven directing the first one. I mean, that was his film, and then you have all of these sequels, these subsequent sequels that came out afterwards, and some were good and some were bad. But I think that this is him like coming back to the franchise and just owning it. He's like, you know what, this is I'm gonna put this thing to rest. This is sort of the final chapter of this, and I mean, it's hard to this movie, as much as it is a sort of rehash of the original in some of the sequences, a lot of the kills are sort of twists on what happened in the first film, but it's also it diverts very wildly. I mean, this is a movie that takes place in the quote unquote real world, where Nightmare on Elm Street is a popular movie franchise, and you have all of the, central cast of the original film playing themselves as actors. And I don't know, I really like meta horror like this, or just meta films in general. And I think that Craven did a really excellent job in crafting such a unique thing, because I mean, he goes beyond just like, oh, Freddy Krueger coming into the real world. It turns into this like thing where the script of the movie that we're seeing is the movie that they're living. So it's got that additional layer to it. And we've seen movies, I don't know, again, I don't know if movies have done that previously. I know that there have been several movies that have done that since. 8.5 was 8.5 sort of like that, right? 8.5 was definitely meta, but I don't know if it was. It's been a long time since I've seen that.
I've actually I was actually planning to rewatch 8.5, but in the future I can report back. I can come back in time and report on this podcast.
It's been years and years since I've seen that, so I can't quite remember if like the movie that we're watching is the movie that's in the script, but I don't think so. But anyway,
no, I don't really think it's like that.
Yeah, so it's very inventive, very fun. I think there's some downsides with this one, some things that I was bothered by and I'm still bothered by. I don't particularly like Freddy's makeup in this one. I think he looks very plasticky. Everything about this movie feels a little bit too polished to me. In particular, like the makeup work.
I mean, I doubt this was the intent, but you could be like, well, if you want it to be a commentary on like how something has left left to the purview of the artist, make it look like a toy version of it.
Yeah, almost. I mean, I don't think that was the intent, but I could see that as an argument, sure. But like how they made his like the new glove, where it was basically just like built into his hand, and I don't know, I just really wasn't into that. And even simple things like I thought that the blood, like all the fake blood in this looked very bright red. Like it didn't look very realistic at all compared to like the first one. I think a good comparison is when you look at the scene in this movie when Julie gets killed, which is a callback to one of the early scenes, and to me one of the scariest scenes in the first film, when where she gets dragged up the wall and onto the ceiling as Freddy's killing her. And when you look at like those two scenes side by side, everything looks so like grungy and gritty and like just real in the first one. And this one, it's like it's in a hospital room, and all the blood looks just it's like neon. It's like neon color. I did appreciate that a lot of the scares in this took place during the day, and in fact, like almost all of them did.
I like that.
I mean, that's always refreshing when that happens. but as a result, it, I think, did diminish from the actual horror a little bit. Like, I don't think that this is very scary, especially in comparison to some of the other Elm Street films.
Well, yeah, I mean, because then it kind of feels like it's more. I suppose if it's about trying to bring it into a real world, kind of taking away that stylized element of bad things only happening at night, but then to make it like taking place during the day or in bright rooms, there's almost this like hyper real effect to it.
Yeah. Again, it didn't really diminish it too much for me. I think that there were still a lot of really, really cool sequences, like when her husband gets killed. Chase, when Chase gets killed in the car, and you have that wonderful 90s CG happening there where the hand is coming up through the seat of the car.
It is such an important bedrock of this entire podcast is being able to discuss 90s CG.
Oh yeah, there's
especially early, mid 90s CG.
Oh yeah, there's definitely some 90s CG in this movie. It reminded me of The Haunting or Frighteners. That kind of CG where like doesn't look quite real. Everything looks kind of wet and very, very like fluid looking. It was fun. I mean, it wasn't overused, so it wasn't like it was a huge problem or anything like that. So you have Heather Langenkamp in here reprising her role from the previous movies, but she's playing herself in this one. You have the son, Dylan, Miko Hughes. Now, a big part of this is that she's trying to protect her son, and Freddy's like getting at her son. Dylan, Miko Hughes, probably know him best from Pet Sematary. He was insanely creepy in Pet Sematary, and he had a pretty nice run there for a while. He was pretty big star back then. He was a really good child actor. Robert Englund coming back as Freddy, but interestingly, I feel like you see more of Robert Englund playing himself on screen than you do Freddy. You actually don't see Freddy that much in this movie. Again, didn't think it was the best in the series, but definitely. And it's also interesting to look at this compared to Scream, because Scream comes out just 2 years later, and it deals with a lot of the same sort of meta elements. So you can tell that Wes Craven was definitely exploring those ideas during this point in his career.
I'm sure we'll get into this more when we discuss Scream, but I've always thought that, it's interesting that Scream is kind of thought as the major, like, I don't know, 90s meta horror text, when I feel like this one is not only, about horror movies, but it's about itself in a way. So if we're looking at like major, so I don't know, it almost feels like this one has more in common with like kind of like the really sort of like surreal sort of meta films that would come later.
I mean, as far as like judging levels of how meta something is, this one,
which I don't want to turn this into,
this one is definitely higher on the meta scale than Scream. But I don't know, like what is the most meta movie? I don't know. Probably like a making of documentary of some other movie. So if you have a behind the scenes making of the movie adaptation, that's probably like the most meta you could ever get.
I was going to say like a documentary about the release of the Blair Witch Project. which
actually did, I think they did make that. So
oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Definitely check it out. I wanted to go back and rewatch there was a really great Nightmare on Elm Street documentary that came out a few years ago I think it was called Never Sleep Again. And
yes, I do remember that. Yeah.
I think it's on Shudder. I could be wrong about that. I'm pretty sure at some point it was on Shudder, and it's a very comprehensive documentary that goes through.
It's like over 3 or maybe 4 hours, isn't it?
Oh, it's longer than that, I think. They go over every single entry in the whole series in great detail. Like, it's not like they skim over, the lesser ones. They do a really deep dive into each.
It's 4 hours. Yeah.
And I wanted to watch the new Nightmare portion. I didn't have time, unfortunately, but this really made me want to go back and watch that and get some more of the behind the scenes stuff, because I remember finding that part of it to be really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say, it holds up. Interestingly, and maybe we'll discuss this more during our Scream discussion next, but it's funny because this came out just 2 years before Scream in 1994, but it feels, man, this movie, it holds up, but it feels very of the time. Like, it's, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe even before its time. It's like feels early 90s. This feels like almost like an 80s movie in a lot of ways.
I mean, I think we can discuss this more when we get to Scream, but I absolutely agree with that. And I think a part of that is that Scream becomes a movie that's so synonymous with like influencing movies that came after it, where New Nightmare feels so inextricably about commenting on the impact of movies coming before it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Scream is obviously about other horror movies, older horror movies, by the virtue of how it is formatted, but we think of it in the terms of, like, this is kind of the movie that, like, had this pop cultural stamp on it that, like, kind of, that felt like so many movies coming out were also kind of, like, hit with this, like, Scream label. I don't know if it's a label or a stamp now or an imprint or whatever, but I'm mixing all my metaphors. But, like, New Nightmare, by virtue of it not really having that same impact, definitely feels just so much a movie that is specifically about the impact of previous movies and specifically on the people who made them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or people who just make art in general. It is really much about, like, it really does feel like about, it's such a corny thing to say, but it really does feel like it's about art.
Well, I mean, it really is. It's like Scream 3, That's just like Scream 3. No, the fact that she gets that they call Heather to come back to the series and work on this, and then it's all about her returning to this franchise that's so famous, but also a pretty graphic horror movie, and her trying to shield her son from that horror. And if nothing else, and this is not a criticism, you can't say that it's the metaphor is about, like, how society was viewing and grappling with horror. You can't say the metaphor is particularly subtle. No, I think that Freddy himself is the insidious nature of the horror franchise.
Yes.
Unsurprisingly, our next film is also directed by Wes Craven, and of course, we can't have a conversation about the emergence of meta horror in the 90s without talking about this movie, released on December 20th, 1996. This is Scream.
Are you ready to scream? For the movie Rolling Stone magazine calls a delicious blend of fun and fright that's smashingly scary.
It was funny. It was exciting.
It's a Scream, baby!
The whole thing was fun.
Never say, I'll be right back.
I'll be right back! Sensational, terrific entertainment, says the LA Times.
Scream is sexy. I was screaming at the top of my lungs and laughing hysterically all at the same time.
Scream.
This is great. You have to see it.
Rated R, now playing.
That's such a great of its time thing, is trailers that have, like, test audiences.
Yep. Audience reactions. Yeah. They don't do that anymore.
Yeah, they just, well, now what do? They don't even put critics posts and, like, critics quotes in trailers anymore. They just use social media posts and they just take what people were saying on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
A killer known as Ghostface begins killing off teenagers, and as the body count begins rising, one girl and her friends find themselves contemplating the rules of horror films as they find themselves living in a real life one. That's all right. Every month. I know we say it every month, but okay, well, I'll move on. Just reading that verbatim.
The first issue I have, well, the main issue I have with that synopsis is the fact that they say a killer known as Ghostface. The killer is never called Ghostface.
No.
we, like, society called him Ghostface because he didn't have any other name. It's like Baby Yoda, you know? It's like, that's not Yoda. So, but they're just sort of colloquially known as Baby Yoda or Ghostface. But in this synopsis, they're trying to say, like, that's what they call him in the movie. In fact, the only time the term Ghostface is even mentioned is in Scream 4. I know this because, of course, it wouldn't be a Saved by the 90s if I didn't watch every movie and every franchise that we discuss.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure our listeners do too, for the extra context, because I get here and I can watch movies closely as I want and write things down, but as soon as the recording starts, I automatically feel like I've never seen a movie before.
I do the same. I'm the same way. Yeah. I'm the same way. Also, to be clear, I did not watch all of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I've seen them enough that I felt like I didn't need to marathon that.
Also, the grammar, the wording here, it's a disaster.
Oh yeah, it's
a
awful.
Killer known as Ghostface begins killing off. One girl and her friends find themselves contemplating the rules of horror films as they find themselves living in a real life one.
Oh my god, I love it.
I mean, come on.
I love it.
The thing is, when is that, you put these on, you see them on IMDb, you see them on Letterboxd, you see ones that are so badly written, and it's like no one else could write a better one.
No, like,
this is
this movie deserves a better synopsis. Like,
yes, and enough people have seen it. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if this is one that's just been like floating around like on IMDb and stuff since probably about the late 90s.
Could be.
This is slowly turning into a podcast where we review IMDb and like Letterboxd synopses, but
there's an idea right there.
That's what this podcast, is for the first several minutes of every review.
I really love Scream. I like the franchise overall. Rewatching all of them this week, I think the franchise as a whole is fine. I think 2 and 3 are weaker, and I think 4 is a nice sort of endpoint to the whole series, although I know they're working on a new one. But I think Scream 1 is a very refreshing take on the slasher genre. You have to remember that this came out in 1996, and during this time, like, the slasher movie was dead. Like, there was just really nothing coming out that was notable in the realm of slashers. And here comes Wes Craven with this meta horror movie that is fun, as the test audience stated. It is a lot of fun, and it's scary. There's clever kills in it. There's lots of twists and turns, and you don't really, I think that Craven does a really good job of subverting the audience's expectation with this one, because he lays it out early on that this is a movie that is all about horror movie tropes. So the fact that that this is a movie about horror movie tropes, you're always guessing if this next scene is going to fit into those tropes, or if it's going to overtly disrupt those tropes, or is it gonna pull a switcheroo and make you think that it's gonna divert those tropes and play into them. So it's a really fun movie to watch from the perspective of, like, you don't really know where it's gonna go next, and I don't think you can easily pick who the killer is as it's progressing either. And so I remember when I first saw this movie. So this came out when I was 13 years old. I saw it on pay-per-view, and I watched it. It was one of those deals, I've talked about it before on the show, where you call it in and you rent the movie, and then you flip to a specific channel on your TV, and it just plays on a loop for like 24 hours. And I watched it like 3 or 4 times during that rental period. I loved this movie so much.
Yeah.
I still like it quite a lot.
No,
but.
yeah. I think this is one of those movies that we often come to on this show where, at least on my end, because my entire history of this movie is going to be in the confines not only of the franchise, but like the legacy of this entire, movie, what it represents in the culture, is that I don't have as much to offer in terms of commentary. Like, I'm almost when I rewatch this, I kind of had this thing where I almost sort of reacted to it with more distance than I had like the last time I rewatched it, which sometimes happens with these like very famous movies that we come back and talk about on the show, where I don't even know particularly what to say about it. Like, I just look at it and it's like I see this movie simply as like a collective fact almost. Like, okay, here is this movie that exists and has this particular legacy. And I feel like once I do that, once I rewatch it for the first time in a long time, I like have to actively do the work to start detaching it from that, to try and like think about the movie on its own terms. So I don't know if I'll have a terrible amount to contribute to this discussion, but I will say, yeah, it's a very well-made movie. It's, one thing that immediately does stick out to me though is, I don't know if we talk about runtime a lot on this show, but this is a movie that comes in close to 2 hours, which is kind of unusual for a horror movie, or particularly a slasher movie, and it uses the time well.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, it's a breeze. It's paced insanely well. I mean, you have that incredible, that like legendary opening scene with Drew Barrymore, where she gets the call and talking about the scary movies and all of that stuff. And I mean, that scene alone had like some really iconic sequences in it. And also, I don't know if this was like a deliberate callback to Psycho or what, but you have arguably the biggest star at the time, certainly one of them, getting killed in the first sequence. And I think that right there was a surprise to a lot of people. I know it was to me at the time. I think that since Scream, we've seen a lot of movies do that. So, in fact, all the Scream sequels have done that. So, so I think it's something that we can expect. But the funny thing is, this is a movie all about horror tropes, and it, I don't know, maybe purposely or inadvertently ended up creating its own tropes in its commentary, which I thought was kind of funny. But I also think it's interesting that like you grew up in a post-Scream world. Like you don't recall how things were before Scream.
No, I do not remember the before Scream era.
So like all is like after Scream came out and had its like influence stamped on genre cinema, which I think is kind of interesting.
BSE and SE.
Yeah.
Before Scream era and Scream era.
And if you listen to the show, if you've been listening to the show, we did a whole episode on post-Scream slasher movies of the 90s, of which there were quite a few. So it definitely made its mark on the genre, that's for sure. And it sort of revitalized the whole slasher genre in general. And it's great. I mean, it's got a great script. You have a really great cast in here. Neve Campbell, who I don't remember if Party of Five was still a thing, if it was still on when she did this movie or not. Maybe, I don't know. But she was great in this. And then you have Skeet Ulrich in there, who had a very prolific career in the 90s. Courtney Cox, of course. This is probably still during Friends. It's got to be, right? Friends had to still be on in 96.
Yeah, no, yeah, that would have been like, yeah, I would have said that was a couple of years like into the run of Friends. That would have been towards the start of it.
Yeah. Rose McGowan in there as well as David Arquette, Matthew Lillard, who Matthew Lillard had a pretty solid career in the 90s as well, and into the 2000s, early 2000s for him. So really good cast, fun twists in there. Just overall, really solid experience. Just looking at this movie, like purely on aesthetics, I think this is one of these sort of timeless movies where
Mhm.
you can watch it anytime and it holds up tremendously well, which is why I mentioned it when we were talking about New Nightmare, because you see New Nightmare and it almost feels like an 80s movie, and then 2 years later you see Scream, and this is a movie that even watching it now in 2020, I'm just like, it looks great. Like, I don't know what it is, but to me at least, it hasn't really shown its age too much. I mean, there's a couple technology things in there, but just overall.
Yeah, I think there's also maybe, and I think this gets overplayed when we try and like overly categorize cultural decades, but there's this whole idea of like the split between the first half of the 90s and the second half of the 90s, and maybe you could say that New Nightmare and Scream weirdly kind of personify that split happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even though they were only, 2 years apart, and I'd assume, I don't know, Scream was shot sometime in like late 95, early 96.
Yeah. It was. I mean, they must have known that this was going to be a big release. They put it out December 20th. So
What a weird. I know everyone talks about that, but what a weird time to put out a horror movie.
They had to know that it was going to be a big hit, so they put it out around the holidays.
Yeah, I think the story about that is like they put it out. It kind of does okay the first week, or does like mildly under expectations. But it's one of those things that like, and very strange for a horror movie, just kind of keeps going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What else?
I want to say a word about the score. It's a very good score.
Oh yeah. I mean the
Marco Beltrami score. Yeah.
The whole Scream series has a really great score. I think they might reuse it, but either way, it's really great score actually.
Yeah. I was watching part of an interview with Marco Beltrami the other day when he was talking about like getting the job of scoring this movie, and he said that he, hadn't, I think, worked on he wasn't really familiar with the horror genre really, and it just wasn't something that like he'd really engaged with. But he got the assignment to like, and the way he puts it is that one of the ways that he was like kind of like had a chance to score this project was because what he like the stuff that he was submitting was just so different than anything else, because all the other composers were just kind of sending in things that sounded like any other horror movie, but he didn't really have that same reference point. And the kind of the way he tells the story and sort of is that he kind of gets his foot in the door off that, and Craven gives him the assignment to like score that scene with Drew Barrymore. And they like apparently gives like Beltrami like a weekend to like come up with a score for it. And he writes the score, they put it in the first scene, and then for the next test screening, they played the movie with that score under the first scene. It played really well with the audience, and they offered him the job to score the movie.
Looking at the sequels, have you seen any of the Scream sequels?
Yes, but not in a very long time.
They're fine. I think that Scream 2 was okay. One thing of note is all the people in these movies. I think it's easy to forget about all the little cameos and stuff in that. Like even in the first Scream, you have like Linda Blair showing up in a cameo, and you have all these. So it's not just like little callbacks to Nightmare on Elm Street or movies that like, or rather the horror genre as a whole. You have like specific little Easter eggs thrown in everywhere that horror fans are sure to really love. Although I do like that Rose McGowan wore the Johnny Depp's shirt, the same jersey that he wore in the first one when he got killed, and like just small little throwaway things like that I think add a little bit of flavor to it. But in the sequels, you have like Omar Epps and Jada Pinkett Smith were the two people who get killed in the opening scene of the first one, and then you have Heather Graham, who is playing Drew Barrymore's character from the first one in the fictional Stab movie. So like in the sequel, they basically make the movie Scream. So the events of the first Scream movie caused the Stab movie to be created in Scream 2. And so you have like Heather Graham playing the role of Drew Barrymore's character. In the third one, which I think is the least good out of all of them, I think it's the weakest one of the bunch. That one takes place largely on like a movie set. They're shooting Stab 3, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it is like takes place on movie sets and stuff like that. And I don't know, that one just didn't really work for me. I remember I saw that one in the theater. It was the first Scream movie I saw in a theater, and I really hated it back then. I think I appreciate it a little bit more now. I kind of had fun with it, but it was too goofy. Like, it went for this kind of goofy vibe. Interestingly, Emily Mortimer was in that one, and Lance Hendrickson, and a young Timothy Olyphant was in Scream 2. He was one of the killers in Scream 2. And Jenny McCarthy was in Scream 3. Jay and Silent Bob had a cameo in that one. And of course, you have Parker Posey acting opposite Liv Schreiber. Another one of their matchups, one of many.
Parker Posey, of course, one of the I guess we're now calling honorary co-hosts of this podcast.
Yeah.
Along with who else do we have on that list? Along with like Devon Sawa and David Krumholtz.
David Krumholtz.
Our honorary co-hosts.
Yeah. And Parker, I mean, the movie kind of sucked, but Parker Posey was good in it. She played the Gail Weathers character, Courtney Cox. So there were a lot of kind of funny moments, little bits of banter between the two of them. So that was okay.
I think what's interesting about the Scream franchise and trying to juxtapose it against against New Nightmare and their approach of like commenting on horror is that like the Scream movies are, so much a kind of about this like sort of ironic quality to it all. Like it gets this increasingly convoluted storyline in which movies about the plots of these actual movies become a part of the plot, and how it just becomes all increasingly both jumbled and detached with each other in this very sort of surreal and very irony laden way. Whereas, which I suppose would be a Kevin Williamson affectation to it, since he'd be writing these films. But whereas New Nightmare is, I don't know if sincere is the correct word for it, but it is just so much more of like a direct commentary. Like it's a meta film. It's very steeped in different reference points, but it has a completely different approach to how it realizes it. It's like whereas there's something so much more like where Scream is practicing it in a very ironic way, that it's sort of wearing its postmodernism completely. It's so such a part of its being,
which is hilarious because that's exactly how Scream, not how it opens, but that's a very early conversation that's had in Scream 4, because Scream 4 opens with I believe it's a scene from like Stab 7 or something, and you have the opening sequence with Anna Paquin and Kristen Bell, and then you come to realize that it's two people watching Stab 7, and then they end up having a conversation about how convoluted the sequels get when you have fictional movies within these already fictional movies, and then the two of them get killed. And so it's, I think that's one of the things I like the most about Scream 4 is that it was so self-aware, and I think they all were to a certain degree, but I think Scream 4 did a much better job of balancing that sort of almost comedy with the horror scenes. And yeah, I really liked where they went with Scream 4.
I think another thing that makes Scream, at least the first one, feel so timeless in that sense is that because like so much of like it feels like it appeals to this to like what's now a very recognizable sort of element of like kind of postmodern ironic comedy, whereas everything that happens in New Nightmare is done without a shred of irony, which is kind of a weird thing for something so meta.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
I feel like it does it. It's like a strange environment where you expect like an irony like to it, but it doesn't really have it.
Right.
Whereas
it plays everything straight.
Yeah, whereas Scream has that level to it that feels so recognizable to so much stuff that came after it and so much stuff that was either directly or indirectly influenced by it.
Yeah.
That would be part of my argument as to why it does feel timeless. I do agree with that.
I don't feel like we need a Scream 5. I think that they can.
I think they're making it.
I know, but
yeah.
But I think 4 was a really good place to end it. I don't think that they need to continue the series, especially because Wes Craven directed all of them. He did all 4 of them. And I don't know. I just don't think it's going to be the same. And I know that they're getting, I think at least Nev Campbell and Courtney Cox signed on. I can't remember if anybody else did, but I don't know. It's just, I don't think it's going to be the same.
Yeah. No. It looks like they've got, I'm looking at now for the upcoming Scream, and they have the directors who did Ready or Not.
Oh, that's right.
It.
That's right.
Yeah.
There was
I liked that.
There was like maybe a month or two ago, someone made a really cool like fan poster for Scream 5, and it was really cool looking. Like, I don't know if you saw it, but it was like a
no.
It was like a road. It was like a road, and it was like sort of going into a tunnel, but the tunnel was like Ghost Face's mask.
Oh yeah,
I
have it now. Oh yeah, that's good.
Yeah, really cool.
That's good. I like that.
Does it say who did that poster on the one you're looking at? Because I would feel bad not.
It has on the poster. It has like a URL on it.
Okay.
It has creepyduckdesign.com.
Okay. Hopefully that's the creator and not like some scumbag who posted their watermark on and is taking credit. Anyway, that's
it. Looks like I'm on there now. It looks like this is it from a glance.
That's Scream. Highly recommend it. I like the whole series. I think that 2 and 3 are a little bit weaker, but and 1 is certainly the best one of the bunch. So
you want to know the story of Splatterhouse, the new horror video game for TurboGrafx 16? They say he stalks the old haunted mansion. They say he's looking for his girlfriend. They say his only weapon against the maggot-eating ghouls who took her is a 2x4. And you say you want to play this game? Splatterhouse. Buy a TurboGrafx 16 system now and get one of 38 selected games free.
Every line of that voiceover was not delivered in the register I thought it would be.
Had a lot of tune in it.
I don't know if it was bad, but there's a lot of surprises. Although it would see an explosion in popularity around the aughts, our next trending horror style saw itself being defined in the 90s with the explosive popularity of the Blair Witch Project. But before we talk about that, let's discuss another found footage movie that came out a year prior.
Directed by Stefan Avalos and Lance Weiler, The Last Broadcast concerns 2 local access cable TV producers who recruit an assistant and venture into a forest in search of the mythical and horrifying Jersey Devil. Days later, only one of the trio emerges. He becomes the prime suspect in the disappearances of the other 2. However, a local filmmaker examines extensive footage found at the scene and arrives at a different conclusion. Now, I had read, and I don't know if this is true because this was something I think I read it somewhere in like maybe on IMDb's page or something about how the directors of the Blair Witch Project drew inspiration from this movie to create their movie, Which,
I mean, if you can't trust the IMDb trivia section, what can you trust?
I mean, the similarities are definitely there. Like when you see The Last Broadcast, it definitely has that Blair Witch DNA in it, or I should, say that Blair Witch has the DNA of The Last Broadcast in it. They definitely have very, very similar styles, almost to the point where it's like, there's no way that was a coincidence. Like they had to see this movie and we're like, hey, we can do this, but maybe we can do it better. Anyway, what did you think of The Last Broadcast? To be clear, I never even heard of this movie before we were researching this.
Me neither. Though I will say, as a native of South Jersey, I always appreciate South Jersey content, even if it's this not particularly good movie. Yeah, I don't know. If it's a part of local folklore, I knew what the Jersey Devil was, but for some reason, my South Jersey upbringing had a specific and pronounced lack of references to the existence of the Jersey Devil.
I was vaguely familiar with it, but I never really knew too much about the Jersey Devil. I didn't grow up in Jersey. I grew up in
South Jersey.
I grew up in southern Pennsylvania, but
I should have been narrowly escaping the Jersey Devil my entire childhood.
Oh man. So this movie's like sort of a cross between found footage and mockumentary style. I don't like the term found footage wasn't even really a thing when this movie came out. There weren't like, by this point there's like tropes. There's like found footage tropes and like rules and things that all of these found footage movies seem to abide by, and they just didn't really exist back when this movie was created. So I think that in a lot of ways, maybe this was a bit of a trailblazer, and maybe an influencer to a certain degree. I mean, at least to one movie that proved to be way more influential. But I think that the big difference between the Blair Witch Project and The Last Broadcast is that The Last Broadcast is a bad movie. And the Blair Witch Project is a good movie.
Yeah, it's a good movie. This is a difference that you can really tell.
Yeah. There's certain things that they do in this movie that I think work in its favor. Some of the interviews I think feel authentic. Certainly the look. It should also be noted that this is the first commercially made movie that was shot on digital, so it looks like shit. So it has a really grungy, awful look to it, which it's kind of supposed to. I mean, it's about these guys who have a low budget cable access show who set off to find the Jersey Devil, and they go off into the woods, and something terrible happens to them out there. And at first I was like, we're not going to, because at one point the narrator, the guy making the documentary, he's like, that was The Last Broadcast. And I'm like, what? Like, that's it? We didn't even see, like, you expect there to be footage of them getting murdered or something. And there was like nothing. It was just them arguing about like batteries in the camera or whatever. And you're just like, okay. And also I looked at the timestamp during that. By the way, this is available on Amazon Prime. I looked at it, and it was like 40 minutes into the movie, and I'm like, wait a minute, we're like halfway. How can they already be at The Last Broadcast? What else is there? But there was more.
Yeah. I feel like after that, we should at least take the time to point out a great new Twitter account that's popped up in recent weeks, @TitlesInMedia.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen it?
Yes, I have.
It's very good.
It is. I don't know why, but the one that made me laugh maybe the most was La La Land. I don't know why, but I just thought that was so funny just seeing that image. Oh, my God. Anyway, it had a lot of really great 90s technology. I'll give it that. Like, this whole movie, if you've ever played a 90s FMV game, like Phantasmagoria or one of those like really great adventure games that Sierra was putting out in the 90s with FMV. That's what this whole movie felt like. It felt like the whole movie was just one long FMV sequence in a video game where they had like that webcam. I think it was called a quick cam or something like that, where it was like the ball that was on that pyramid. Everybody had them back then, and they were like old like Packard Bell PCs, and they were talking about IRC. Like the one guy who they suspected to be the killer was obsessed with IRC. He was just chatting. He was like addicted to his computer and the internet. So the internet played a big role in this, which is kind of interesting because, I mean, that's, maybe we'll talk about that again with the Blair Witch, but overall it was just very poorly made. Like it just, the central, I think that for the most part, the performances were fine. Like it felt similar to Blair Witch in that you have people who I believe are non-actors. They seemed like non-actors. And I don't know if there was necessarily a script involved, but the conversations felt sort of natural. But the problem was like, and maybe you could say the same thing about the Blair Witch, where like most of the dialogue was just completely inconsequential, where it's just people bickering back and forth. I did love how they kept repeating that one scene when what was the guy's name who they suspected to be the killer? Jim Stewart?
I can't
Yeah.
Jim. Yeah.
Where,
I can't possibly be expected to remember anything that happens in this movie.
There's this one scene when Jim gets mad at them for some reason. He goes, "I'll see you back at the camp, man." And they showed it like no fewer than 3 times throughout the runtime of this movie. And it's such a poorly delivered line, and they keep going back to, "I'll see you back at the camp, man." and like, I don't understand why these guys wouldn't just immediately cut this guy off, because he seemed like a complete nut job from the beginning when he was like having like convulsions and like burning the paper and then rubbing the ashes on his arm and like just doing all kinds of weird stuff. It's like, you want this guy's supposed to be your guide. He's your guide into the forest, and he's like having some kind of like psychotic break.
I mean, at least and we might be getting ahead of ourselves again, but if at least for the Blair Witch Project, there's like a reason a very obvious reason why they have to continue doing what they're doing.
It's just kind of boring. Like all of the titles and like transitions and like little graphics that they put on the screen and stuff like seem so hokey. Like there's this one really odd, it's towards the end of the movie, where they have like just images and words that are popping up on the screen over and over again, just like murder, and like with a still image, and then like below it there'll be another still image and it'll say like conviction, and you're just it was just like,
it's like,
what is this?
It's not certain if it's trying to like reference like found footage. Well, I'm actually not going to say this at all, because I was going to go down a line that would try to infer that it was going to be a genre that hadn't been codified yet, but I was like, half of it is like this very like proto found footage thing, or really a found footage thing, and the other half of it seems to be a take on like, I don't know, like basic cable crime documentaries.
Yeah.
And they don't really go together at all, because it's basically trying to it's trying to take 2 different approaches to this material simultaneously, and they always feel separate.
I don't know how to really place this, but like, you know, there's some movies like the UW, what's it called? Like the UHF or UNF Halloween special, where it's meant to look like a videotaped Halloween special that was shot back in the 80s. Or there was a movie that came out recently called Survival Skills. It was playing festivals, that's meant to look like an 80s cop instructional video, and they're like sort of intentionally bad. VHS is another one, which was a really clever film that came out earlier this year, where that was supposed to be like, you know, a videotape that was like picked up at a yard sale that just has all kinds of stuff on it, home movies, clips recorded from TV, commercials, stuff like that. And they did a really good job of making it look and feel authentic. And you look at this movie and it feels like a crappy cable access documentary. But at the same time, there's nothing here that elevates it above a crappy cable access documentary. Like,
exactly,
all of those other movies that I mentioned, they have the aesthetic. They have that like garbage, low res, 80s aesthetic. And, you know, they have the bad graphics on the screen and the like crappy transitions and stuff. But there's something there within the narrative itself that keeps you engaged and sort of uses the bad quality as a tool, whereas this just feels like it's just a bad documentary. So overall, I found it to be fairly boring. The narrator was super dry, and I had a really...
was that a deliberate affectation? I don't know.
I think so, judging by the ending. So I'm gonna spoil the end of this movie.
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, if you don't want the last broadcast from 1998 spoiled, skip ahead.
Go watch it on Prime now.
Yeah,
I guess.
Pause this and watch it and come back.
It's a tremendous use of your time.
What they do is they break away from everything else that preceded it. So it pulls away and turns into like sort of a conventional movie. And it turns out the documentary filmmaker / narrator is the killer. He is the Jersey Devil. And it doesn't make any sense at all. Like, what? And like,
it's the dumbest plot twist. It doesn't make any sense. It's not interesting.
No. I don't. And then so you have this guy, and he's like still shooting the documentary, and he ends up killing this woman who she's like a forensics person who's like piecing together the footage and restoring it. She's like restoring all of the messed up digital footage, and she fits together this final piece that has his face on it. Now, to my knowledge, and I had a hard time really following this, but he says at one point that he gets, so they have all the tapes, they think they have the last broadcast, and then someone sends him additional tapes in the mail, and then he takes those tapes to get restored. And then after she discovers that it's his face killing these people on these tapes, he kills her in a really brutal murder scene. Like, it's what you see on the cover of the movie, so you know it's gonna happen. But she's like, I guess I don't really understand like her setup, because it looks like she's in her home rather than some kind of clean room, but she has like plastic everywhere and like a crappy computer like in her, I guess, living room. I don't really understand why she wouldn't have, you know, this is like really serious. This is evidence. You know, why would you be working on it at home? Like, it seems like you'd be there'd be all kinds of like contamination happening there. I think that goes against a lot of protocols, but
yeah,
it had to happen for him to go in and kill her. And he uses like the plastic that was everywhere in her room to suffocate her. And again, like, really brutal scene, which was literally the only thing that happened at all, other than like some kind of creepy imagery where you can see flashes of the guys who got killed. But also they were talking about like how they didn't know how it was possible that one man could kill like three other men, and like how they were just like ripped apart and like slashed and their limbs were missing and all of this stuff. And you look at this guy and you're like, how did that happen? How does any of this make any sense at all?
Yeah. I will point out that the poster of the film contains a quote from Time magazine, in which they brand it a slick thriller.
There's nothing slick
about
this movie.
Absolutely not. The point is that, if anything, the point is that it isn't.
It's the opposite of
it's
slick.
Not like it meant to be and isn't. It's just that by design, it's not.
Right. It's not slick. So yeah, I really didn't care for the last broadcast. I always struggle to even remember the name. Like every time when I was like gathering notes and stuff, I just couldn't. I kept forgetting the name.
It's like that month where we talked about 4 movies and I couldn't remember the titles of 3 of them because only the 4th one was Surf Ninjas.
Yeah. The director, one of the directors, Stefan Avalos, he did a movie a couple years ago called Strad Style, which was a documentary that I liked quite a bit. It was about this guy who his like one goal in life was to create recreate a Stradivarius violin and build one from scratch, and he wanted it to be a perfect replica. And it just documents him trying to do this over like it takes him like years to do it.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was a pretty
interesting.
Yeah, it was a pretty good documentary. But this movie's just not for me. I have like just fundamental problems when movies completely change up their style or rules or mechanics at the very, very end. That really bothers me. This won't be the last found footage movie to do that. Other found footage movies have done that too, and
it's a pioneer. It's such a pioneer. It's pioneering problems.
It kind of does with like the digital like distortion and degradation. And one of the things they did in this that I liked that I don't see a lot of in found footage movies, they mess with the audio in such a way that everybody sounds like their pitch gets messed up, and they sound super low pitched, and it sounds creepy. But what I was hoping for is just one scene, like one conversation where it does the opposite and it increases the pitch. They always decrease the pitch to make it sound more creepy. It never increases. What's going on there? I just want one of these found footage horror movies where the audio gets messed up for them to sound like chipmunks.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they've just settled on, I don't know, low-pitched, distorted voices sounding demonic, menacing.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's sort of like in the great American films, the unfriended films that effect where everyone has a very bad internet connection, so their voices are always distorted in that way. It sounds on like a Skype or Zoom or something. Yeah.
I like those movies though.
Yeah, they're good. No, I said great American film series.
Yeah. To be clear, before we continue, I historically do not like found footage movies. I'm not a fan of many I've seen tons and tons of found footage movies, and I think maybe that's part of the problem, is that it really there's a lot of tropes in found footage movies that bother me to no end. And so just putting that out there before we continue. But
it's never been a format that I've had any particular attraction to. I'm still trying to think about what I thought of the movie, and I feel like that says a lot. It's like, I knew that I didn't like it. I'm starting to remember the ways I didn't like it, which says a lot about the ways I didn't like it.
It's poorly made. There's not much to it at all. Like, it just doesn't go anywhere. It's not interesting. The characters are very unlikable, and they're all really just one-dimensional. Like these all of these characters are indistinguishable from each other. Like, they have no personality whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
The main guy, the guy who's accused of the killings, is like the only one that's bringing anything to the table as far as character.
It is an enormous problem that none of these characters have. Yeah, we'll talk about this when we get to the Blair Witch Project. But yeah, it's that this film has no distinguishable characters in it is a problem. It's a contrast where, at least for the Blair Witch Project, we'll talk about more in a minute. At least there are characters.
As Ken mentioned earlier, our last film this month is the Blair Witch Project, directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. This movie took the nation by storm when it was released on July 30th, 1999, with its clever marketing and unique storytelling mechanic.
In October of 1994, 3 student filmmakers disappeared in the woods near Burkittsville, Maryland, while shooting a documentary. A year later, their footage was found. You might even say it was found footage.
There you go. That's it.
Is that where the name comes from?
That's the start of it all.
Is that... Yeah. All right. The Blair Witch Project. What are we supposed to say about it?
I gotta say, I was not looking forward to revisiting this. I've seen this movie a couple times. I saw it in the theater when it came out, and I think I watched it one other time at home since then. It was probably a long time ago, but it's the type of movie where not only is it easy to just remember what happens in it because so little happens in it, but it's a movie that is it was so ingrained in everything pop culture back then, and for years following it, that it's just impossible not to like know what happens in the Blair Witch Project. Even it's like one of those movies where even if you didn't see it, you feel like you saw it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because of like
I kind of realized that was me. I'm one of those people.
Yeah, like all of the parodies and stuff. Like, oh my god, the parodies. Ken, the Blair Witch parodies, everything, TV shows, movies, spoofs, everything Blair Witch, award shows, doing sketches. Oh, everything was like non-stop Blair Witch parodies. It was just mind blowing.
Blair Witch just becoming the omniculture.
It was so ridiculous, just so ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I think the movie itself is quite interesting. I mean, nothing like this had really existed, and doing some research for this, looking at found footage as an emerging, I wouldn't call it a genre, but as an emerging trend in horror film during this time. Like, The Last Broadcast is really the only other one that you can even consider to be close to found footage. You have like Man Bites Dog, but that's more of a mockumentary. It's not necessarily found footage. So you have like some other movies that could loosely be considered found footage movies, but it's not really. I mean, these two movies are definitely movies that sort of defined the term, and especially Blair Witch, because when this movie came out, the marketing behind it was, I think, that was what sold it. Because when you look at it, when you look at this movie at face value, it's literally a crappy looking, shaky cam mess that just has a bunch of douchey young people running around in a forest screaming. Like, that's really all it is. Arguing, screaming, but still, running.
Like I said, more characterization than The Last Broadcast.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. 100%. You know who these characters are. Like, you get their personalities.
A tremendous advantage.
So, taking this movie at face value, there's just not a lot here. There's just not a lot going on. But when you start adding all of these different elements into it, the marketing being one where this movie was marketed as a documentary, and they like, I remember one of my friends, actually Ryan from Ryan Watches a Movie, he was working at BJ's Wholesale Club, and he was reading, I think he was reading like Rolling Stone or something, and he saw an ad in like a magazine ad for it, and he's like, have you heard of this movie called like The Blair Witch Project? It's this crazy documentary coming out where they like found these like tapes, and it's like these people who went missing, and like he thought it was real, and even after the movie came out, people thought it was real. Like they thought it was, and I think that comparing this to a lot of other found footage movies, this one does a really good job of sort of nailing that aesthetic and making it feel like it is actual real footage. Especially because they begin the movie with them like interviewing people in the town and stuff, and it's all clearly non-actors, and all of that feels just so genuine that the sort of the ruse of it being a documentary is, it's believable. Also, one thing that I noticed watching this, the home media version, the VOD version that we watched, it had end credits. The one in theaters didn't have end credits. It just ended. I
was suspecting that. Yeah. Because there would have been no discussion of it being being a documentary, because there's end credits.
Yeah, there was
actors and writers and directors.
Yep, no end credits, or there was no like title sequence or anything like that. It just started and then it ended, and that was it. I'll actually never forget it, because I remember thinking like, wow, this is the first movie where as soon as the movie ended, like the lights went up. Like there was no. It was weird. It was like a weird experience. It was like.
Now, obviously, there's a whole number of reasons why you can't actually, do that.
I know.
With an actual film production. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of that's at least a great effect, that like the movie ends, and then the lights come up and you're just all kind of there.
Yeah. The other thing the other thing that goes along with the marketing was the fact that they had a big internet presence. So this is a movie that came out in 1999. So it's right. It's right at the .com boom. Everybody's starting to get online now. Most people have computers and some sort of internet in their homes, and they made a website, and there were like all of it. Like it was a very detailed website, and it sort of really hammered in this fact that this is like a documentary. This is what you're watching is real, and I think that played into, because of course it's on the internet, so then there's all these conspiracy theories about it and everything. So it was it kind of just happened, like Blair Witch happened at sort of a really perfect moment, whereas we've seen other found footage movies that are very slow paced and don't have a lot going on and have very minimal dialogue and all of this stuff. We've seen tons of them since the Blair Witch Project, and none of them have come even close to having the same impact that movie had. I mean,
I mean, just the idea that, well, one, I think there's sort of a thing where it's hard to pass off a clearly a fictional film as a documentary just by virtue of now the same thing that propels this movie, the internet being the same thing that makes that impossible, because you would immediately have no way of, it would be impossible just because, you would try and find a Google search for a news story from Maryland about 3 students being reported missing or something in the forest, and you wouldn't find anything. So right. I was like, this is a very specific piece of its time, because it's like around the very like bleeding end of like right at the very end when you could do that.
Yeah. And it worked out tremendously well for it. I mean, the movie clocks in at 81 minutes according to IMDb, so it's not overly long. Yeah. I think that the directors knew that this was a movie that couldn't sustain a long runtime.
No,
just by virtue of what it is. I remember a lot of people saying like they're getting sick in the movie, causing motion sickness and stuff because, I mean, up until this movie came out, like the crazy shaky cam where you can't really see anything and people are running and all you hear is like running and screaming and just blurred.
Yeah,
everything's blurred on the screen. Like that really wasn't a thing back then. You just didn't see that in movies. Certainly not movies in a theater environment.
Wasn't there that movie a while ago where it was like an action movie and the whole gimmick was that it was first person and everyone who saw it said they felt sick?
Hardcore Henry.
Yeah.
A lot of people said they got sick from that movie. I thought they did a really good job in that movie of minimizing.
I haven't seen it, but I know.
I watched a whole behind the scenes thing on how they were able to like try to stabilize the image as much as they could and stuff like that. And anyway.
Yeah,
I actually liked. As I said, I was sort of dreading going back to revisit this because I knew how it ended, and I mean, I think that's the big thing. Like when you go into Blair Witch and you already know how it ends, you're just like, oh man, I got to sit through this because the end.
No,
I mean the big thing is like it all boils down to like a 30-second sequence at the end, and it's literally just a guy standing in a corner. Like that's what we're dealing with.
Everything else is... Yeah, one thing that... realizing that I really hadn't seen this movie before, or at least, not from start to finish in one sitting, is that I can't imagine just watching a part of... I don't even know how much of this I've seen before, but I feel like I've seen some of it. Watching this movie entirely from start to finish is, one, I have so little desire to rewatch it because it basically is that last scene and 79 minutes of tonal build up to it essentially, but from what there is like something very technically interesting about being able to piece that together, that this is otherwise what could have been an incredibly just uninteresting thing is still has that feeling of innate dread in the sense of that it's so heavily based on like improvisation and interaction between these characters, and it's so much more about the characters than say the last broadcast. And even though these characters aren't particularly they're interesting, they're still characters in a more palpable human way than the other movie.
Yeah. And I think I think they do a decent job with what they have. I mean, this is a movie that I don't know. Does this have a budget listed on it? Because I mean, it's got to be like $10.
It says they shot it for between 35 and 60,000, and post production took it up to somewhere over 200,000, but they don't have an upper figure.
200,000?
I don't have any idea how you do that.
On IMDb,
I don't know where.
It says 60,000 on IMDb.
It says on Wikipedia it says 60,000 to shoot it and then 200,000 in post.
That's crazy.
And then internally it says 200,000 to 500,000 on what?
Damn. Pay me 100,000 and I can recreate Blair Witch.
I know. Of course, it's always. I mean, whatever the figure is, I feel like it's got I mean, there's got a profitability rate that no other movie will ever have.
Yeah. There's no special effects in it whatsoever. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just really stripped down, and it's fine. I mean, there is a genuine atmosphere to it. The fact that you have this trio of students who are, it's not that they're lost in the woods, it's that like they literally can't get out, so it's like the woods is like it's trapping them in. And I think that there's a certain claustrophobia to the movie. I think that there's definitely a certain amount of dread, especially when they find like the rock piles and then the stick figures. There's some creepy stuff to it, and I will say that in the final sequence when they find the house and go in there and it's like all decaying and falling apart and like that. Then and the handprints on the walls and stuff. Like it's a genuinely creepy finale for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. And I will add for the record, when I said there's no upper figure on the Wikipedia page, that was technically, that's not true. I meant to say there's no upper figure that I believe, because it would say go above $500,000 total. And so I said no upper figure because it's like, I don't believe that. I don't even believe that. I don't even want to say that out loud.
Yeah, I just can't.
No.
I mean, are they rolling marketing into the post-production? Because that would make a little bit more sense to me.
Yeah, I have no idea. Well, I haven't seen it, so you'll have to comment on it. Of course, the budget was much higher on Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2.
Oh, I can comment.
Please comment.
I can definitely comment on this movie. It is awful. It is so bad. So Blair Witch 2, it came out in 2000, so it was a year later. Obviously, they were trying to cash in on the massive success of the first one, quickly churn out a sequel that, so in this, and it's very interesting that this movie comes out because it actually ties in both of our topics this month. It is found footage in that it is a group of people who are going into the woods and filming, and they're making a documentary about the Blair Witch. But the twist here is that they're making a documentary about the Blair Witch Project, the movie. So this takes place in a world where the movie, the Blair Witch Project, exists, and the town, Burkittsville, is like swarmed with fans who are trying to, see where the tapes were and all of this stuff. So it plays into the found footage themes and the meta themes. So that's what it is right there. Everything culminates into Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2.
And I'm guessing at a budget of $15 million, it's not just more found footage.
No, it's not. It's a mixture of found footage and just regular awful looking cinematography. You have Jeffrey Donovan in here from Burn Notice, and he's like he's this guy who is leading a tour group into the woods, and the tour group, they get caught up by the Blair Witch, and what happens is like they all black out and wake up, and they don't know like how long they were out for or anything, and they end up like going back to the dude's house, and some weird things start to happen. Like they start to lose time, and they end up finding like these other people who were out in the woods for like 5 days, even though it seemed like they were gone for like an hour. So it sort of plays around with like time, and they end up recording themselves, and they see themselves like they're getting possessed, and there's like some pretty lame twists in it. It's very bad. There is,
I can imagine.
Yeah, it's got one hell of a new metal soundtrack though. So
well, that sounds important.
Yeah,
that sounds very important. Carter Burwell did the score.
Okay. All right.
I'm just reading that fact now. If you want a useless fact, at $15 million, Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2. Well, first of all, The Rage Carry 2 title format there. It's been at least 6 months since I mentioned that movie. Come on.
Well, it's funny because like this movie has some major The Rage Carry 2 vibes to it. Like
maybe I should watch it.
It feels very similar. It's much worse. It's much worse. But
I'll watch it someday, maybe. But okay, if you want my useless trivia fact of the day, At $15 million, it cost 250 times more money than the $60,000, we'll just go with that, budget of the Blair Witch Project. Now, if 2016's Blair Witch would cost 250 times more than Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2, it would have cost $3.75 billion to make.
Oh my god, that's incredible! Because I did actually watch the 2016 Blair Witch in preparation.
And how is it?
It's bad. I didn't when that one came out in 2016. I didn't see it because I had heard that it was so bad, and I just knew like this doesn't look good at all. Like I like Simon Barrett, the writer, and I like Adam Wingard, the director. These
the Guest and
yeah. And
You're Next.
You're Next. You know, two movies that I absolutely loved. The Guest and You're Next. But I don't know, man. Like this seems like some kind of weird, like just they pitched him the idea and they were like, hell yeah, we'll do Blair Witch. Like that's really it's an incredible opportunity to further our careers or something. And then I follow Simon Barrett on Twitter, and he's always making fun of the fact that he did Blair Witch 2016. The thing about that one is that there's just it's like not even worth talking about because it's purely found footage, and it is basically it's just sort of a remake of the original one. Like it's not, and I mean it's not a remake, but it feels like one where it's pretty much the same stuff happens, and it's kind of just the same, follows everything beat by beat. And I think the problem with the 2016 Blair Witch, well, it had many problems, but the big one was that by 2016, the found footage bubble had already burst. Like people were just done with found footage movies. I mean, you already had like, I don't know, 4 Paranormal Activity movies by that point, and it was a tired trend. And
the only good found footage adjacent stuff happening at that point it was the Great American Film franchise, the Unfriended series.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. But Unfriended was different enough because of the computer screen thing. Like that made it feel a little bit different. Anyway, it's just this really standard. It's like a bog standard found footage movie. It's just it's dull and not good. Like it's funny, that one they try to justify certain technical things like sound, like they give everybody these like Bluetooth things so that like everybody has cameras, but it still doesn't feel like that's actually what we're looking at. And then also like there's a scene really early on, like when they're gearing up to go into the woods, and you see that one of them has a drone, and you're like, oh boy, this drone's gonna play a part at some point. And it does, but it's just like not as cool as what you would expect. Like I feel like you could probably do something really creative with a drone in that scenario where it's like lends itself to a jump scare or something, but it doesn't really happen like that.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, that alone feels like an incredible loss on the part of the film to introduce the drone and not.
Yeah, I mean, come on, good opportunity there. Like, I mean, that's like what Paranormal Activity was. They were like known for coming up with clever ways to scare you. What was that? Which one? I think it was. I can't remember if it was like part 2. I think it was part 2, where they put the camera on the oscillating fan. Like that was really cool. It was like part 2 or 3. One of them used an Xbox Kinect. I remember that. Yeah,
I'm not terribly familiar with the Paranormal Activities.
The
Paranormal's activity.
I really liked them for the most part. I didn't see the one that was like the spin-off. It's called like the Marked Ones or something.
There's one called the Ghost Dimension.
I didn't see that. Yeah, I didn't see the Ghost Dimension. And I didn't see the Marked Ones.
What is that title? Gonna go into the ghost dimension.
I don't think I saw them actually. The thing is, like during this time, I was watching so many of those found footage movies that they all start to like blend together.
The ghost dimension's in 3D. You know how there's 3D found footage?
Oh yeah. There's this one found footage movie that I think a lot of people hated on back when it came out. Frankenstein's Army. This is a movie. Frankenstein's Army it takes place in World War II, but it's a found footage movie. It's a found footage movie that takes place in World War II. So
what? Dare I ask
how that makes sense? I can't tell you. They try to, if I remember correctly, they try to justify it with like them that like they're supposedly using like old cameras, but of course it doesn't look that old. The thing that I liked about Frankenstein's Army is that it's like you're walking through a haunted house at like Halloween Horror Nights or like any higher end haunt where you're just going through these like crazy corridors in this like Nazi lab, and there's just like crazy creatures and monsters and deformed people at every room, every hallway, and you're just getting bombarded with scares. And I found it to be really fun.
I
need to rewatch this for Halloween. How do you feel? Like, do you like found footage, or?
I just never really engaged with it very much. I mean, I don't have anything personally against it because I never really watched very many of them. I gather it's one of those genres that its relative cheapness to make meant that it just, kind of fell off because the market was just so oversaturated by them. Where my perception of it was that, there were a few ones that really felt like they were, kind of key moments in the in the genre, but after a while there were just maybe too many. Does that happen to like genre trends, I guess, if we're going to talk about trends?
It happens to pretty much every genre trend. I mean, there's inevitably like one movie that's just groundbreaking and it starts the trend, and then there's just a million imitators, and some will like iterate upon it and give their own unique spin, but eventually the all of the like sort of cheap carbon copies will overwhelm any of the like unique feeling imitators and like just end up destroying the whole genre. I mean, like zombie movies, like for a while there zombie movies were everywhere, but they completely imploded on themselves.
I wonder if trends in horror are particularly susceptible to this just because because you can make horror movies much faster than you can make other kinds of movies. Like the turnaround is just so much faster.
I think
so. If and it's relatively inexpensive.
I think that's part of it, but I think that another aspect of it is that horror as a genre is very malleable in that you can use it to reflect any kind of situation that's happening in the world today. So, if you want to use a zombie movie to reflect the current pandemic that we're living in, there you go. If you want to use it to represent consumerism, there you go. Like there's ways that you can use the genre to push a message, and I think that's one reason why a lot of people gravitate towards the horror genre.
And I think that would also be part of the reason why it's that terrible phrase like elevated horror is so awful, because like it's just always been a part of horror, is just that
right. It's always been elevated.
Quality of
to me. Yeah. To me, it's always been elevated.
Yeah. No, yeah. I always thought that was, I'm not quite as, it's not just as I can't speak to horror as much as you can, just because it's never been like, I've never had like a particular inclination towards genres. That's not even true. I don't know. I just can't talk as much about horror, but yeah, even to me, I've always thought that phrase was completely ridiculous.
Getting back to just 90s trends overall in horror, there actually weren't that many. There were a couple other ones that we didn't talk about, and I think that you mentioning elevated horror is a good segue into mentioning the idea of sort of the prestige horror movie, which I think that you saw a lot of those in the 90s. Movies like The Sixth Sense, Seven, if you want to consider that horror, and Silence of the Lambs, if you want to consider that horror. Like those three movies sort of helped elevate the genre into a more accepted genre, I guess. I think during the 90s, I mean, still to this day, horror movies are still disregarded largely, and sort of pushed into the corners of, film conversation. I think less so now, but certainly back then, I think that horror movies were still largely considered to be, cheap, empty-headed, genre fare that didn't have a whole lot to say, even though we've seen, by that point, dozens of examples to the contrary.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like you can really track these. You can really track this as feels like a bridge between that, that past and obviously in a very literal sense, you could see that as like the start of these particular trends or influences that would come to mark, many future years of horror films, even in just a very literal sense to say, the Blair Witch Project and found footage.
Yeah.
So yeah, it feels like a particularly important moment in the genre's history just to discuss some of these like key movies from the 90s.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people look at the 90s as not being a great decade for horror, and comparing it to the 80s, I would certainly agree. Like, I mean, the 80s is like the best. I mean, that's like the king of the horror decades. And when you look at the 90s, it certainly, I think, pales in comparison, but you still have a really tremendous number of great horror pictures that came out during the 90s, and I really look forward to continuing. There was like, I don't know, there was just a very specific style that the 90s horror movies had that I find to be really, really fun. A lot of them just felt a lot cleaner than a lot of what we saw in the 70s and 80s, and I don't know, sometimes I kind of like that. It was mostly teen horror in the 90s, but at any rate, I think that's gonna do it for this year's Halloween special. I hope everyone has a fun and safe holiday. Let us know your favorite 90s horror trends by sending us an email at 90s@filmpulse.com or contacting us on Twitter or Facebook at 90spod. Until next month, for Ken Bakley, my name's Adam Patterson. This has been Saved by the 90s.
Bye, everyone.